that a question in the middle there? Yes.
Hi, yeah, it's Graham from the Environment Agency. I've got a couple of bits, but I'll roll them into one. One is that I know in our sort of area in Yorkshire we've got quite a few property protection schemes, and they're sort of passive measures, if you like, that the flood doors rather than the ones you install are becoming a lot more popular. And the question is, I guess particularly for Heather, so I didn't get a chance to lunch, is there anything that's working well in terms of engaging with those sorts of communities and those sorts of schemes where it's less clear that there's a role for people to actively sort of install things and put things in place and look after their neighbours, because ultimately the measures are kind of built into the doors themselves. There's not an air brick cover maybe to put on or a flood guard to install. The other thing was, I guess it's around the fact that, well, this guidance that's coming out is obviously very welcome, but we've had a few years of these schemes across the country, and we certainly know of schemes where in last year's floods, for example, the property's still flooded despite having the schemes in place, and maybe the surveys haven't been done as well as they might have been, and it's just really an open question as to where should we go with those sorts of schemes where, in theory, we as authorities have looked at them and allocated a bit of money for them, but actually the proof of the pudding has kind of come and they've not actually saved them from flooding, so where do we go next?
Well, to answer your first one, Graham, and I'm assuming you mean property level protection schemes that go to people who haven't necessarily flooded yet. So how do you communicate with them? I think it's really important. I think it's that early bit again that I was talking about. And certainly, you know, if any of you want to look into more of the Lower Thames strategy where they're putting property level protection in as part of a sort of pre-empting flood issues they may have once the strategy is in place. And I think that the key is engaging early beforehand and trying to look into that community to see, you know, if there's a resident association, what there is around, or literally door to door drawing people together, because it's so important whether they flood or whether they don't, that they do draw on each other for support. It's not always guaranteed, I agree, but if it's done early enough and effort is put in, and yes, it is effort, then yeah, it tends to be very well. It is successful, definitely. And I think your second question, Roger's nodded ahead to wanting to say something else. I'll pass it to Roger to start.
You mentioned that people who'd had property level protection fitted could flood again. That's very, very possible. I've had it fitted and I know I will flood again. The reason being is that the last flood came to 625 millimetres above my threshold, and my property level protection is up to 600 millimetres. So it will flood. And the reason for that is that there's no specific surveying of individual properties. There's a height issued for insurance reasons, which is 600 millimetres, by which height you are unlikely to be sued because the property would fall over. It depends on what it's built of. If you need to spend the money, get a full structural survey done, and then you can work out how high you can protect that building to. If that building is not capable of protecting to the height of the flood, you're better off letting the water in rather than have the building fall over.
And I suppose another bit to that is that we know that it will only protect us to a certain height, but also we must bear in mind that it will give us, hopefully even those ones that did fail, gave them a little bit of time to be able to put things upstairs and to move furniture up, etc. You know, poor compensation may be, but at the end of the day, it is a little more time.
Thank you. I think your first question about the flood doors rather than an aftermarket product to add to the door is very relevant, and I think it's clearly an innovation that we should consider. It may be appropriate for the specific building that you're using that door with, or it may not. There's certainly a number of these products around now. I think understanding how they work is important, and that has to be communicated to the user. We've, as part of the Smartest project, we've worked on a number of case studies, particularly in the UK and area of North Manchester, which is not doesn't have the infrastructure in terms of volunteers and groups at present to help, but people do have property level protection. But it's probably been a specific area we looked at. It's a number of years now since they were affected. So how do you keep that the knowledge of the technologies they have, the issues of maintenance that come with it alive? And I think it's clearly some issues to deal with there. On the issue of whether flood resilience works or not, I would go back to a comment I made earlier about things like construction skills. And this is not just the skills of the tradespeople, but surveyors, who can often, they be very knowledgeable on buildings, but less knowledgeable on flood, for example. So we need to look at training, education and qualification, I think, as well, for people who are carrying out surveys, who are installing equipment, and generally within the construction industry, raising awareness of the technologies. I mean, I think the guides that we have here today with the 6 steps should be a positive move. These schemes that don't appear to have worked, I think we need to find out why they haven't worked, and maybe the 6-step approach is something which can help to avoid that sort of failure again.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Brian Rogers, Wigan District Council. I also sit on the Institute of Civil Engineers expert panel. Just picking up on your point, Stephen, about training for professionals, it seems that the 6-step approach as a whole relies totally on the first stage, which is assessing the property correctly and being able to give independent advice on the right products. We've heard about groundwater flooding, which has its own problems, which very few people professionally trained know about. How do we get the professional institutions involved in this? I understand that 2 years ago, DEFRA were consulting on qualifications or some sort of register for those that are experienced in this work, which doesn't seem to have got very far at all. And I think it's essential that gets moving. So I'm interested to hear your comments on that.
Okay, thank you. Like many people, I've probably had discussions with DEFRA and others about skills and qualifications, etc. I mean, one of the difficulties is, where's the driver come from for this? In areas where we've forced existing professionals to go back and receive additional training, to receive qualification and to continue through certification schemes and audits to demonstrate that they can continue to do the job properly, it's generally driven by legislation. Now, we don't have that in the area of flood management. So in the absence of it, what's going to drive it? Possibly client-driven, but that would probably be more at the government programme level than at the individual level. where someone's investing, because people, again, it's about awareness. But you know, in absence of that, maybe there's drivers from the insurance industry, local authorities, etc. But certainly legislation would drive forward qualifications, training, competence, etc. But you can, again, it has to be done correctly. And at the moment, I don't think we know a lot of the things, but the training would have to be packaged accordingly, the qualifications set accordingly, etc.
Can I make a comment on that? If you're going to pay £20 per house for a survey, you're not going to get a professional, good job. And a lot of people are looking for the lowest cost, group a lot of houses together, get a survey, go out and do them all en masse. If you want a professional job, then you're going to have to raise your budget to pay accordingly.
Yeah, Jim Barrick with Tilda. I'd just like to say that participating in Smart Test has been a very interesting and valuable exercise. What I'd like to talk about or reflect upon or see implemented is where we go from here, because I've been working on flooding for many years now, and I don't think we're making any progress substantially. I mean, governments seem to be very strange in terms of the priorities that they have, and I mean, for utilities or something to be knocked out, I mean, the problems we've got at the moment with the economy would pale into absolute insignificance. And I don't know whether the insurance situation, I don't know if Douglas is prepared to comment on that, probably not, might be the big driver that gives it a push. But I can't understand why, you know, every time I pick up my magazines, the word infrastructure leaps out at me in bold print, but the only infrastructure I see is shaving a few minutes off coming from London up to here for many billions of pounds, and the priority is completely wrong, and maybe we're going to have to rely on old Father Thames flooding the Palace of Westminster, you know, before we get some real action. So in terms of not letting this thing go on until we get major consequences, be that with utilities on the bigger scale, and I sympathise with people on the smaller scale, how are we going to get it to the forefront?
Probably over to you, but just quickly, as far as I'm concerned, moving property level protection forward and successfully and to pass that good message on, without a doubt, I would say community. You just got to get to grassroots level, work with the grassroots community, and they're the ones that spread it.
Well, I'm glad it's been an interesting experience. No, I think, you know, again, risk of repeating myself, legislation's obviously a powerful thing here, and that's why I think it's worth going back and whether it can be done just now, examining the issue of building regulation for new build. I know that, you know, okay, planning is supposed to capture the aspects of flood risk and require resilience or resistance measures to be taken, but maybe that doesn't always follow through into the types of buildings and the resilience that we build. In absence of that, I think, you know, the property level side of things, you know, is it going to be driven from the bottom up or top down or somewhere in the middle? I think an issue is always going to be cost for individuals, and, you know, without going into the economies of the family, but you're always going to be in competition for that £5,000 or £6,000. So, you know, maybe there's things we can do there and imaginative ways of funding. But then if we look at the Green Deal as an example of energy efficiency measures, it's something that's going to take a while to capture the public's imagination. So I think primarily legislating requirements got to be the first that, again, you know, we could go on about the insurance aspect for a long time, but you know, there'll always be a divide between you know, your insurance provider can change from year to year, so what's imperative for the insurance industry to invest in this? But well, maybe we'll see in the future of insurance.
Okay, got one more question for this session and then we'll go to the next speakers.
The big imponderable to me seems to be dealing with the groundwater, especially that comes up inside houses. We're talking about all these different measures for protecting openings, and people say we'll put in pump and sub, but pumps come in all shapes and sizes. I've been advised that the size of pump that we might need in the houses on the scheme I'm working on are actually so big that I wouldn't want one in my own house, and so expensive I couldn't possibly afford to provide it anyway. So we're going to have to go for the small handleable pump, which has a very low output rate, and it needs an awful lot of hydraulics and working out what you can do with a non-return valve to get it up to a level that you'd even bother with. I just wondered if groundwater is going to be the next issue and coping with understanding it. It's all very well understanding flood levels, flood risk and that kind of thing, but groundwater flow is another ballgame.
I totally agree with you, and you know, as many people share with the same concern that you have, and also the worrying thing is I do see people buying pumps just off the DIY store and then wondering why they fail because they can't cope under the pressure. So I think you know, we do need to look at quality again if we want something to work.
I think it also comes down to knowledge. You can work out exactly the rate of water coming into your house. If you know the size of your wall, you know your floor area, you can work out the seepage, so over a rate of time you can work out how much water comes into your home and therefore how much the pump has to move. As to them being unsightly, I've got one about the size of a dustbin that's buried in my front room. It's all underground and it'll pump out significantly more water than will seep in through my house. So it can be done, but there's a temptation to go for something small, something out of the way, and they just won't work.
Well, I'm not sure I'll add too much to that, but I mean, what struck me was the figures that Ian put up earlier of the properties at risk from groundwater flooding. So, yeah, it's clearly an issue, but whether you're pumping the water out or not, I think resilience of the structure itself has probably got to be the first concern there.